Ukraine apparently received new fighter jets, at least that's what the images suggest, while Germany offers to equip 3 mechanized brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this sitrep about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have once again hit the Ryazan oil refinery. As you can see, visual evidence shows that damage was done. According to some calculations, 1/3 of the capacity of the refinery are taken out. The Ukrainians also hit 2 radar stations in Rostov. This is confirmed more or less by firms that at the positions where those were, fires were being recorded. The Ukrainians have identified 2,577 soldiers to be POWs, according to Ukraine's commissar for the missing in action. The data for 680 more, among them 91 civilians, are unconfirmed. The interesting part here is that Ukraine needs to use open source data to find its own prisoners of war, as Article 122 of the Third Geneva Convention from 1949 is saying that the International Committee of the Red Cross is supposed to receive the data of the prisoners of war that a nation has taken to then hand it over to the other side so the relatives know what happened to their family member. So in the context of international law that is ratified by Russia, Russia has to hand over the identities of everyone they took alive, but apparently and evidently Russia does not intend to do that and does not do that. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and here we start in Sumy. In Sumy, the Ukrainians have advanced east-northeast of Kindrativka. We have the geolocation here at this point. Ukrainians have reached up to here at this on the map. The Russians, on the other hand, have advanced at Yablanivka, which is here. We have them right south of it. This is still in the contested area, but we see that the Russians have recently advanced, and the deep state map, the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, has roughly added this territory now to the Russian control. We had visual evidence of this for quite a while. I've shown it to you in past sitreps. Now we see that the deep state map has corrected its map to indicate that this is now, according to them, under solid Russian control. That's it from Sumy. We switch to Kharkiv. I have no changes, so we go directly to the Eastern Front. Here, Konstantin Mashovets, the Ukrainian analyst who is very reliably said 3 days ago that Ukrainians were advancing in the north of Kupiansk. There were no visual evidence, but by now I found new evidence from yesterday that indicates that the Russians have been seen at this point here inside of Kupiansk. That should be at this point here indicating a slight advance of the Russians inside of Kupiansk. A Ukrainian officer also said something about the situation there. He basically said that the Russians are sending 1 to 2 soldiers into infiltrations that have a flag with them to then create the pictures that we talked about in the last sitrep, where the Russians had supposedly advanced into the heart of Kupiansk. So this is more or less the confirmation. We've seen that the moment both sides and Osind especially took over and used those flags, this showing of the flag as an indication of solidified control and would adjust their maps accordingly, there was an incentive for both sides to manipulate this for the propaganda purpose, obviously, and this is something I mentioned quite a while now. We have that now being confirmed by the Ukrainian military. The Russians also advanced further south in the Izium-Liman direction. Here we have the Russians advancing west of Kolodyazy. We have them geolocated at this point here, that they've reached this. This should be more or less at this point here. So we see an advance in this direction. And the Russians have also advanced further to the west. This is also a fresh geolocation here into this town, into these houses. And that's actually already here. So the Russians are advancing towards the southwest, getting closer to the Seversky Donetsk, and are in a process of more or less enveloping Liman. They are apparently trying now to do some kind of turning maneuver towards Liman, cut off the lines of supplies, except for the one from Sloviansk. We'll have to see how that continues there. That's it north of the Seversky Donetsk. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have the Ukrainians operating in Serebryanka. We have that geolocated here, that the Ukrainians were in the western part. This is in the northwestern part of the town. In this area here, recently we had the Russians operating in this, but this definitely confirms that the Russian control over the town of Serebryanka is not consolidated yet. Further south in the Kostiantynivka direction, I have no changes. When we go to the Pokrovsk direction, we have the Ukrainians claiming that they liberated Novoekonomichne. This is here, but I have no visual evidence. Now, in the last sitraps, we showed you Ukrainian presence in the center and to the eastern part. We also recently had the Ukrainians even operating east of it, but we also had Russians operating in the south of it. So whether or not Novoekonomichne is actually liberated by the Ukrainians, there's no confirmation from my side. I'm far from certain that this is sure, that this is true. Then we have the Russians advancing in the area close to Dobropilya. We have a geolocation here that shows us the Russians in this built-up area, and this is here at this point. So an area that is considered by the deep state map to be under Russian control. We now definitely have the confirmation that the Russians are still operating in this area according to the fresh geolocation. We have the Ukrainians also operating here, and they seemingly have advanced, or they obviously have advanced. We have geolocations of this. This is them on the outskirts of Suvorove. And on the map, this is here, inside of the area that the deep state map still considers under Russian control. This also makes it likely that the town of Sukhetske is liberated again by the Ukrainians, even though that's not confirmed simply by that yet. The Ukrainians also were concerned about the usage of sewage pipes, as the Russians recently illustrated the usage of sewage pipes with some carts that they constructed so soldiers can roll through them. According to this Ukrainian officer here, the sewage pipes inside of Pokrovsk are too tight to be used, only 60 centimeters, so roughly 2 feet in diameter. That a town of this size only has sewage pipes of 60 centimeters diameter would surprise me, but I can't correct that. I'm just surprised that they are supposed to be only that small. I guess some parts of it might be, but that the overall sewage system, especially where those small pipes meet, still have only 60 centimeters would be a surprise to me. But as I said, how would I know better? I can just say that I'm somewhat doubtful, or that I have questions there. Apart from that, we have the geolocations from Udachne. This is an area that is considered to be under Russian control by the pro-Ukrainian deep state map for a while, but we have a geolocation of the Russians in here, and as you can see, pro-Russian Krymy Kapris was not considering that area to be under Russian control, so for them, this here was still under Ukrainian control, but as you can see, this is considered to be Russian for a while already, or occupied by the Russians for a while. Further in the Dnipro direction, we have changes. Here, the Russians have likely taken the town of Novoselivka. We have that geolocated here. We have them in the north. This was in the east, the north and the south, indicating that they were all over the town. That makes it likely that it was taken. And to complete it, we also have the Russians inside of Yanvarske. This is directly to the east of it. Here on the map, it's still being considered as contested, but with Novoselivka being taken by the Russians, Yanvarske would be either cut off or it's evacuated by now. So the next map correction should probably show that under Russian control as well. And that was it with the territorial changes that we have. We see a number of successful Ukrainian counterattacks at various points for the past few days, but this should not be understood as an overall change of the dynamics. According to Russian mill bloggers as well as Ukrainian observers, the Russians are redeploying right now quite significant forces in the Donbass. They've sent a combined arms army towards the Chasiv Yar direction that is likely going to aim at the fortress belt, and several VDV units and naval infantry units are being concentrated behind Dobropilia. There are expectations that this might lead to bigger mechanized attacks again in this direction with the hope of achieving a breakthrough. So we will very likely see massively intensified Russian attacks in the near future. That we are currently in a phase where the Ukrainians have some opportunity to conduct successful smaller counterattacks will not change anything in this direction. And in the north here, the Russian advances west of the Sherebets River are getting more and more problematic. We now have visual evidence that the Russians have started hitting the Izium Sloviansk road with FPV drones. So this is this direction here. And as you can see with the colors, this is one of the big roads that the Ukrainians have for resupply of the fortress belt to connect it. And with the Russians getting ever closer to it, now I have shown you they have reached these points here. Obviously, the Russians have the supply lines in their range of FPV drones. That's a little over 20 kilometers, but as we heard in the past, they have even fiber optic drones with a range of up to 40 kilometers. So from now on, the fortress belt will have trouble getting resupplied from the northwest as well. The trouble in the Donbass are getting ever bigger. That's it from the developments along the front line. We also have reports from the interior. The SBU has arrested a deputy, a member of parliament, who was working, according to them, for the Russians. He was a member of a now forbidden pro-Russian party, and according to the Ukrainian intelligence, he was hired and recruited by the FSB and was working for the Russian military. Then there are reports that in Chernihiv, drones have dropped fake bills, and why that initially sounded weird, like do they try to force an inflation or something? It's clear when we look at this here. So it was printed like a bill, but it actually has the demand basically telling the Ukrainians, if you want the real money, tell us where Ukrainian military movements are, tell us where soldiers are. This is to recruit spies by offering them money, and obviously as it looks like a real bill, people will see it and lift it up and pick it up, whereas normal paper they might just ignore. So actually, I guess a smart way to make leaflets being picked up by just making them look like money, so people bow down to take them up. This is obviously illegal from the Ukrainian side. As we can see here, law enforcement's warned of criminal liability. Obviously, if in times of war you support the enemy, you tell the enemy of movements for payment, then you commit treason. In the political sphere, we have Zelensky saying that he's not going to go to Moscow, as more or less expected. He said Putin should come to Kiev, so I guess there will not be a meeting. Zelensky also said we did everything that was asked from us. We showed every possibility, every will that could have been asked from us to make peace, and the Russians blocked everything. And basically, Ukraine did whatever it could to allow for peace, but the Russians do not want to. So the war for now is going to continue, but the plans for what is happening after a peace agreement are continuing at the same time. The coalition of the willing met in Paris. Here, the consensus was that a strong Ukrainian military will be needed, let alone, of course, for one of the reasons for that is that the coalition of the willing is not willing enough to defend Ukraine by their own power. So they will need the Ukrainians to do that. Macron, the French president, said 26 states are willing to participate in a security force. Not all of them with boots on the ground, some just with air forces and others. But the important thing is the troops will not be on the front line but behind it. And there we clearly have to say, I said it last time too, this will have a significantly smaller effect, as a tripwire effect is missing out of this. So the usefulness of these security forces is significantly lower than it could be if they were along the front line. And at the same time, these negotiations are happening while Russia is flat out refusing Western forces, and they are saying if they are being sent to Ukraine, they will be a military target. But we have to see. This is... The Russians will not accept Western forces. So if the West is already saying after a ceasefire we will send forces, you could even argue that this will make a ceasefire less likely, as the Russians would expect afterwards to have NATO troops inside of Ukraine. So if the agreement is that NATO forces or forces from NATO member states are needed to protect Ukraine, then Russia has to be forced first to accept those by putting pressure onto Russia through the Ukrainians or through international finances, through sanctions, through other means, which is also not going to happen right now, which is also not visible at the same time. So right now, I do not see anything of any of this progressing. The Russians fight this war to get control over Ukraine and to keep NATO away. The last thing they want is NATO forces inside of Ukraine, basically having invited them. Just any NATO forces, even if they are not on the front line itself, would be closer to Russia than they have been before in this region. So there's simply no way this is going to work unless the pressure on Russia is increased massively. Zelensky also said financial security guarantees would also be possible. Obviously, if the West is not going to send its own soldiers, then Ukrainian soldiers will be needed along the front lines, and those soldiers need their wage, and the Ukrainian defense industry needs money to supply them. So I guess the second best option is to send Ukraine enough money in so they can keep up a massive army even in times of peace. Then Putin at the same time says it's impossible to come to an agreement with Ukraine. He combines that with accusations that Zelensky is illegitimate. We talked about it so many times in the past that I won't do it again. But if we take everything we have here together, the West not being willing to send enough troops to actually stop the Russians, the Russians not willing to accept any foreign forces inside of Ukraine, then the Ukrainians acknowledging this, and the West not being willing to put pressure on the Russians to a degree that the Russians are being forced to accept a ceasefire and then foreign troops inside of Ukraine. If we combine all of this, there's nothing in sight where this war might end anytime soon. The war is going to continue, and I do not see anything that is going to change that, at least as of now. But at least there are some good news too. Ukraine has, according to the Camel scheme, a former Azerbaijani Mig-29. This is a typical Azerbaijani Camel scheme, which was now seen with Ukrainian colors, flying in Ukrainian colors. Now, there is, so far as I've seen, not an official confirmation yet, but Ukraine had 3 Azerbaijani Mig-29s in one of its factories for a maintenance work in 2022. The Russians attacked that factory, and what happened to the 3 planes is unknown. So as of now, it's unclear whether Ukraine was able to buy it from Azerbaijan, whether it was a present, or whether they simply confiscated it, which would not be unheard. That happened a lot, obviously, in the past when a nation is fighting for its survival. Any military means that are available are usually being employed. But while that is unknown, it seems to be clear that the Ukrainians have added at least 1 Mig-29 from former Azerbaijani stocks to their inventory. Then from the Czech Republic, news that they are going to train F-16 pilots with subsonic trainers and simulators, and that would be an indication that they are going to train fresh recruits to become pilots. Subsonic trainers are likely not needed for an experienced pilot, so this is likely meaning that they are going to train up Ukrainian citizens, Ukrainian civilians, or Ukrainian normal soldiers to become pilots for future F-16s. And then we have German media writing that the German Chancellor offered to train and equip 4 mechanized brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, the article itself has some logical fallacies. There is a claim that 480 infantry vehicles per year would be sent, including IFVs. First of all, it's unclear what is meant with this. Infantry vehicles, what is that? First of all, the vehicles only have to be replaced if they have been destroyed. So if this is meant as part of a peace dividend, as part of a security guarantee, there is no need to deliver 480 a year once those 4 brigades are filled up, unless you want to continue building additional brigades. And then, of course, 480 vehicles can be any kind. That can be IFVs, that can be artillery pieces, even though I personally wouldn't call that an infantry vehicle, but that could also be just off-road vehicles like SUVs or something like this. So it's unclear what it's meant here, but it seems that at least that the German offer is to train and equip 4 mechanized brigades in case a ceasefire is agreed upon as part of German aided security guarantees, basically in a sense to enable the Ukrainian armed forces to keep the peace. The bigger question then would be, why wait until that point? But that's something that I can't really answer yet. But that's it from me for this sitrep. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.